Hello my crochet friends, this is Sarah from Ned and Mimi, and today I am delighted to introduce you to the basics of Tunisian crochet by making these super cute and super easy crochet coasters. Now, depending on where you are in the world, you might say Tunisian crochet or you might say Tunisian like me, but either way we are talking about exactly the same thing. So if you are anything like me, I know that right now you probably just want to pick up your yarn and hook and start crocheting straight away. And I promise we will get to the fun bit in just a few minutes. But first, I just want to take a little bit of time to cover the very basic things that you need to know when you are getting started with Tunisian crochet. So the first thing to know about Tunisian crochet is that for every row that you make, there are actually two parts. So the first part is called the forward pass, and in this part we are going to be picking up loops and then keeping them on our hook for the entire length of the row. And then for the second part, which is called the return pass, we're going to work those loops off one at a time until we get back to the start. And that brings us to the second important thing to know, and that is that the length of your crochet hook is going to determine the width of your project. So the good news is that for our little coasters here, we can actually use a regular crochet hook because we do not need to fit a huge number of loops onto the hook. So you might have come across specialized Tunisian crochet hooks like this one that has a much longer handle. Or you might have even come across something like this where we have a hook with a cable attached. So these hooks are going to be necessary if you're making something quite wide, like a scarf or a blanket, for example. But luckily for us, for our coasters, we do not need any special hooks to get started. We can just use a regular crochet hook. So this brings me to the third thing that we need to know, and again, it relates to our crochet hooks. So if you are using a regular crochet hook for Tunisian crochet, then it is really important that you choose one where the handle has the same thickness all the way along. And this is to make sure that all of those loops that we are picking up are the same size, and also to make it easier to slide them up and down the hook as we work. So this one that I showed you earlier is just perfect, as is this bamboo hook. And this one is also an adjustable hook in that we can attach a cable to it, but I actually just use it as a regular crochet hook a lot of the time. And similarly, this plastic hook with a straight handle will work really well too. So in terms of hooks that would not be suitable, anything like this one where the handle is not the same thickness all the way along, so an ergonomic hook like this, that would not be suitable. And similarly, something like this would not work either. So that brings us now to the last thing, and arguably one of the most important things to know with Tunisian crochet, and that is that the hook size that you choose is likely to be considerably larger than what you might normally pick for your chosen yarn. So here I have my worsted weight cotton yarn that I'm going to use for my coasters, and if we have a look at the yarn label, we can see that the recommended needle or hook size here is a 5mm or letter H crochet hook. However, with Tunisian crochet, the stitches create a much more dense fabric than with regular crochet. And for this reason, we use a larger crochet hook to stop our fabric from becoming too stiff and too dense, and also to help it from curling too much, as can happen sometimes with Tunisian crochet. And we will see that a little bit later on. So in general, you will choose a Tunisian crochet hook that is 1 to 2mm larger than is written on the yarn label. And as with all crochet projects, the hook that you pick is going to depend on a variety of factors. So how tightly or loosely you crochet, what you are making, the type of fabric that you want to create, all of those things come into play here. So for my coasters, I have chosen a 6mm crochet hook, which is larger than the 5mm recommended on the band, but not a huge amount larger. And the reason that I haven't gone for an even bigger hook is that for my coasters, I want the stitches to be nice and tight. I don't want to have a lot of gaps between them, and I don't need the fabric to have much drape. So for that reason, I can get away with using a slightly smaller hook. Okay, so before we get started, let's just have a quick look at our coaster. So as I mentioned earlier, I am using a worsted weight cotton yarn for my coasters, and I used Drops Paris, but there are plenty of other cotton yarns that would work great, and I have added links to some of those below. So the center square here is crocheted using the Tunisian simple stitch which you might be able to tell from the name is the most basic and easiest Tunisian crochet stitch pattern to learn. So we are going to use our 6mm hook to make that square. And then for the border, I switched to regular crochet stitches and I just worked a very easy single crochet border followed by a round of slip stitches. And I just did that to finish the coaster off nice and neatly. So for the border, as we are working regular crochet stitches, I have used the recommended 5mm crochet hook. So for this project, you are going to need 2 crochet hooks. Okay, so without further ado, let us get started. Okay, so for our coasters, we are going to begin with a slip knot, just like you would for a regular crochet project, and then we're going to chain 12. So you'll want to keep your tension nice and loose as you work this starting chain. So we'll yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook, yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook again, and so on until we have 12 chains. Okay, so there is our starting chain. Now, if you'll remember from earlier, there are 2 parts to every Tunisian crochet row. So for the first part, that is called the forward pass. We're going to just pick up loops all the way along the chain. And then for the second part, which is called the return pass, we'll work those loops off all the way back to the start until we are left with just 1 loop on the hook again. So for our first forward pass, we are going to flip the chain over, and you can see here that we have these little back bumps at the back of each chain, and that is where we are going to work into. So let's just have a little closer look at them. So there are back bumps there. So we're going to be picking up those loops all the way along the chain. So let's start from the second chain from the hook. So we'll skip this first chain here, and we're going to insert our hook into the second back bump. So in we go, yarn over, and pull up a loop, and then we'll leave that second loop on the hook. Then go into the back bump of the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, and we have 3 loops on our hook, and we'll just keep working all the way along the chain, picking up loops in the back bump of each one. So there we go, there's our first forward pass worked, and if you want to do a quick count of your loops, you should have a total of 12, so exactly the same number as your starting chain. So now let's go ahead and work our return pass. So the first step of the return pass is simply to do a chain 1, so we'll yarn over, pull through that first loop on the hook, and there is our little chain 1 made. And the purpose of this chain 1 is simply to get your hook to the correct height for the row. So you can think of it like a turning chain 1 if you were working a row of single crochets. So now we're going to work off our loops bit by bit all the way back to the start. So we'll yarn over and pull through just the first 2 loops there. So we can see now that 1 loop has already been taken off, and we'll yarn over, pull through the next 2 loops, and that's another loop gone, and we'll just continue repeating that all the way back to the start until we have just 1 loop remaining. And there we go. So that is our very first row of Tunisian crochet worked. So this row is called the foundation row, and no matter what stitch pattern you're working, you are always going to begin your projects with this foundation row. So now let us go straight into row 2. So let's pause for a second here and just have a little look at what we have. So as you can see in row 1, we have these vertical bars that we pulled up as part of that foundation row, and that is what we're going to be working into as we work our second row. So if we just have a look at the start of our row here, this first loop here was that first loop that was on your hook when you began the foundation row, and this loop here is going to correspond to that. So what that means is that we don't need to work into this very first vertical bar here. We are going to go for the second one. So we'll insert our hook right underneath that vertical bar, yarn over and pull up a loop. And now we have 2 loops on our hook. We'll insert our hook under the next vertical bar, yarn over and pull up a loop, and we have 3 loops on our hook, and then we'll just continue working that same pattern all the way along the row. Alrighty, so we're almost at the end of the row, and you can see that I have worked into the last vertical bar here, but I still have a little section here that needs to be taken care of. So what we're going to do now is work what's called the end stitch, and we're going to work that end stitch into that chain 1 that we created here at the start of our return pass from the previous row. So let's just grab my yarn needle again so we can take a closer look. So if we look at the very outer edge of our work here, this is the front loop of that chain 1. And then if we rotate around to the side, we can find this little back loop here. And we actually need to go through both of those loops. So we're going to be going from front to back under that front loop, and then also under that back loop. And that's where we're going to pull up the very final loop of this forward pass. So let's go ahead and do that now. So under that front loop and the back loop, so you can see we have both of them on our hook. We'll yarn over, pull up a loop, and that is our end stitch worked. So that is the forward pass of row 2 done. So again, if you want to do a quick count of your loops, you should have 12 in total here. Perfect. So now we are ready to go on to our return pass. And the good news is that the return pass here is going to be exactly the same as what we did for row 1. So we'll yarn over and do our chain 1, and now we'll start working off those loops one at a time by yarning over, pulling through 2 loops, yarn over again, pull through the next 2, and so on all the way back to the start. And that is our second row of Tunisian simple stitches done. So from this point onwards, all you need to do is keep repeating that row 2 until you have a square, and that is going to form the center part of your coaster. So I'll just go ahead and work a couple more rows, and then I will let you take it away by yourself. So remember, we are not going to work into that first vertical bar. We are going to go into this second one here, yarn over and pull up a loop, and so on all the way along the row. Okay, so again, almost at the end of the row, we just need to work that end stitch. So let's get out our yarn needle again for a closer look at this. So here we have that front loop of our chain 1. And if we rotate around to the side, we can see that we also have our back loop here. So our hook is going to go under both of those loops. So in we go, yarn over and pull up a loop. And that's the forward pass done. So we'll chain 1, as we always do to start the return pass, and then work those loops off one at a time. And that's row 3 done. So now you might notice that your work is curling a little bit. So you can see that mine does have a little slight curl in it here. And that is completely normal for Tunisian crochet. And especially because I'm only using a 6mm hook here with my worsted weight yarn. If I was using a larger hook, it might not curl quite as much. And the other thing is that because I'm using a cotton yarn, cotton has absolutely no stretch at all. So that actually helps a little bit with the curling too. If I was using an acrylic or maybe a wool yarn, I might find that there was a little bit more curl. But don't worry if your work is curling. We are going to sort all that out with the border once we finish the center square of our coasters. So now, if you like, you can pause me. Go ahead and keep repeating that same Tunisian simple stitch row until you have a square. So you don't need to worry about how many rows you have or anything like that. Just keep going until you have a perfect square. So I'll go ahead and continue on with that now, and I will see you back here very, very shortly. Okay, so here I am and I have finished my square. So I have worked a total of 11 rows here, but don't worry if you have a slightly different number to me as long as you have a square. So my square measures about 3.25 inches in width and the same in the height. Now, before we get onto the border, we have one more step left to work. So if you have a look here at our rows, in between each of our vertical bars, we have these little gaps, and we don't want to leave it like that. We want to close up those gaps so that the edge at the top is as neat as the edge at the bottom here. And we're going to do that by working what's called a bind off row. So if you have any experience with knitting, you will be familiar with this idea of binding off. So today I am going to work the slip stitch bind off method. So there are a few different ways to bind off, but I think the slip stitch one is pretty much the easiest. So to do that, we're going to insert our hook under that second vertical bar like we normally would, yarn over and pull up a loop. But this time, instead of leaving the loop on our hook, we're going to continue to draw that first loop through the second like so. So basically we are making a slip stitch here. So let's go ahead and do that with the next vertical bar as well. So we'll insert our hook, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then continue to pull that loop all the way through. And we'll just repeat that all the way along, giving us a nice neat edge at the top of our project. And here we are almost at the end of the row, and we're going to work our last slip stitch through that end stitch here. So exactly the same way as we would normally, under the front and the back loop, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull all the way through. And that is our slip stitch bind off done. So I absolutely love how this is looking. I mean, I know it's just a really small square, but I just love the texture that you get from this Tunisian simple stitch. So you can see that I do have a little bit of curling happening here, and we're going to sort all that out now with our border. So what I'm going to do is grab a new color for the border, and actually let me pop out this hook and switch to my 5mm. So I'll just yarn over the new color and pull through, and then just pull on that original color to get everything into place. And we can actually just cut that first color now to make things a little bit easier. Okay, doke. So now that we have changed color, obviously if you don't want to change color, you can just continue working with the same one, that'll be fine. So if we have a look at our square here, you will see that it's actually super easy to work a border around Tunisian crochet, because all along the top here, we have very obvious stitches to insert our hook into, and the same down the side, the same at the bottom edge, and then the same at the opposite edge. So it's really, really easy. So I'm just going to begin by chaining one, and then I will single crochet all the way down along this left edge. So I'm keeping the right side facing towards me at all times. So away we go. So this is much easier. Anyone who has single crocheted down the sides of your stitches with regular crochet will appreciate just how nice this is. So I'll continue all the way down to the first corner, and then I'm going to do 3 single crochets just to turn the corner. Okay, so here I am at the first corner, and I'm just going to do 3 single crochets into this little gap at the bottom here, and that will get me all the way around to the bottom edge. And actually I'm just going to continue working over that tail there, and if there's anything left I can weave it in later. Okay, so there's the first corner turned, and now we just continue working into that bottom edge. So we're basically just going into the 2 loops from that starting chain, and then just keep going all the way along to the next corner, and then turn that with our 3 single crochets again. So it's super, super easy. Alright, so here I am. I've just got one more stitch left to work into, and I'm actually going to do my 3 single crochets into that stitch, and that'll bring us perfectly around that final corner. Okay, so there we go. So now this is already looking so nice. So we've sorted out a lot of the curling, and if you want, you could actually block this later as well, just to eliminate any remaining curl, but I think this is actually doing pretty well. So just one more thing to do, and that is to work around slip stitches all the way around the edge. So I don't need to join at the end of this row or anything. I'm literally just going to go into that very first single crochet and work a slip stitch. And I'm also going to grab a stitch marker and just mark that slip stitch, just because sometimes at the end of slip stitch rounds I get a bit confused about which was the first one. So away we go. So I'm just going to slip stitch into each single crochet all the way around. So don't worry about corners or anything, just put a slip stitch into the top of each stitch. Alright, I'm almost back at the start. So as you can see, this was my first slip stitch, and this one here is the last one that I have left to work into. But I'm actually not going to work into that stitch. I'm going to do what's called an invisible join now, and that is just going to give the neatest finish to this round. So if you don't want to do the invisible join, don't worry, you can just slip stitch into the last stitch and then slip stitch to join to your first one. But let me go ahead and show you how to do the invisible join now, because I really like this and I love how seamless it looks. So I'm just going to cut my yarn for my border color here, and then I will just pull all the way through. Next, I'm going to grab my yarn needle like so, and now what I'm going to do is work kind of an invisible stitch to cover up this one that we are not working into. So I'll pop out my stitch marker, and I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go from bottom to top through both loops of that very first slip stitch. So up we go, and then just pull gently on the yarn so that it's going in front of that missed slip stitch there. Now I'm going to come back to the last stitch that I worked, and I'm going to go right through the center of that last slip stitch. So through the center there, through the center of the stitch behind it, and all the way out the back, and then I'll just pull that gently through as well. So you don't want to pull too tight here, you just want to pull it so that it covers that missed stitch and kind of looks like a slip stitch in itself. And then all that's left to do is just weave in your ends at the back. And there we have it, we are all done. I really hope you have enjoyed making these Tunisian crochet coasters with me. And as you can see from my selection, I started making them and then I couldn't really stop. So I really hope that it is going to be exactly the same for you. Thank you so much for watching. Happy crocheting and take care.